Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the professor, and this is the moment of truth. I heard a man once say that as black people in this country, we don't need leaders, we need teams. Now, when someone says that, a lot of black people start getting nervous, because being part of a team requires active participation. You can't do it from the comfort of your sofa, or sitting back and seeing if somebody else is going to do it for you. A lot of black people have taken up the mentality that somebody else is going to fight for their freedom. Someone else will do all the heavy lifting while others just sit back waiting to enjoy the fruits of other people's labors. And that's not how power works. That's like thinking that you can get yourself into great physical shape by watching other people lifting weights. When I talk about black people beginning our own intelligence gathering, that may sound crazy to you, but that's only until I explain exactly what I mean. And believe it or not, we've already had some black people who have successfully done it, albeit on a small scale. You've probably heard of scam baiters. These are people who make it their mission to disrupt and shut down those scam call centers like the ones in India who pretend to be Amazon or Microsoft. They try to con people into giving them their personal financial information. Well, scam baiters try to stop them. These guys are not with the government, they're not with law enforcement, and yet they took it upon themselves to find out where these scam call centers are located at, who owns them, and who works in them. They've even gone so far as to visit some of these places overseas and to take video of the buildings that the scammers operate out of. The scam baiters make videos showing how they hack the computers of the scammers and delete all their files, and how they waste the scammers' time by pretending like they're going to give the scammers their credit card info, only to just take hours and hours talking the scammers in circles until the scammers eventually hang up in a rage. But what I found interesting is that these scam baiters make it a point to recruit the very scammers they've called to become their informants. They want to get people on the inside, and this is a crucial part of what they do. The scam baiters call this particular practice social hacking. When they shut down a scammer's computer or otherwise bust them in the act, the scam baiters will then start to befriend the scammer by talking to them. They'll ask the scammer, "Why are you working in a call center? What does your family think of what you do?" etc. And believe it or not, this is actually proven effective at getting the scammers to open themselves up to being informants against the very call centers that they were working at. They even go so far as to help the scam baiters get access to the building's security cameras and even place malware on their very own call centers' computers. When I talk about intelligence gathering, this is the kind of stuff that I'm talking about. You don't need spy satellites, supercomputers, or helicopters to do it. But what you do need is to be organized and focused. And what's true for the individual is also true for the group. Black people can get together as groups to go to the club, or if you have some misguided youth with no father figure, they can get together to be a gang of good-for-nothing punks. But when it comes time to talk about power, all of a sudden we make excuses, and that has to stop. The Black Panther Party organized itself like a small government. They had a number of people in their organization with the title of minister, a minister of information, a minister of culture, a prime minister. But the one post that the Black Panthers didn't have but desperately needed was a minister of intelligence. In the past, I've referenced a book called Gideon Spies. It dealt specifically with the formation of the Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency. Now, the lazy and the stupid complain whenever I mention this book, and they try to conceal their laziness and stupidity behind a phony wall of black pride rhetoric, saying, "Brother, why is we reading about them Israelis? We the real Jews, don't you know? We ain't got nothing to learn from what they all was doing." Now, that argument flies in the face of reality. Malcolm himself said you can learn a lot by observing others, even adversaries, and he was right. See, these do-nothing Negroes who get terrified when you start talking about knowledge or start examining how power works at a deep level, their brains get hurt by these kind of conversations, but they won't admit to their intellectual laziness and the fact that this conversation is beyond their narrow little minds, so instead they try to claim that there's something wrong with talking about it. And the people who try to hide behind that talking point also haven't contributed anything to black empowerment, and they're not going to. They've never organized anything in their entire lives. Hell, nothing in their lives is organized. You ask them, do black people need some sort of intelligence gathering apparatus, or at least an intelligence gathering movement of some sort? And they'll usually give a half-hearted yes to that. And then you ask them, well, if you don't approve of the examples that we are giving you, what examples do you approve of? Whenever you hear me reference something like Gideon Spies, I'm not doing it as an endorsement of the Israeli government. I'm doing it simply as a case study in how an intelligence organization can be built from the ground up by people who were never in one. This is something that these do-nothing whiners on the sidelines don't like because it's a conversation that they can't participate in. If they object to an examination of Israel as a case study in intelligence gathering, then what example would they consider to be acceptable? Of course, the answer to that question is always silence, because they can't tell us about anyone doing anything anywhere. These people can never tell us about alternative examples that we can and should learn about because they don't know of any, and the reason they don't know of any is because it never crossed their minds to learn about any. The only subject that these people can speak on is smoking weed and giving their uninformed brain farts, so they try to shout down anyone who mentions anything else. Would you tell a boxer that it's wrong for him to learn about and study who he'll be taking on in his next fight? Or would you tell a poker player that it's useless for him to learn about the person that he'll be playing against in his next match? These people who complain would tell the boxer that he can't learn anything from watching his opponent, and they would tell a poker player that he doesn't need to learn what tells or other strategies his opponent tends to use. This is what a certain group of low IQ, low mentality individuals do among us. They try to make their ignorance sound virtuous, when it's actually treacherous. Because it's not my focusing on the origins of Israeli intelligence that they hate. They hate that we're focusing on something that requires you to pay attention and use your mind. The example of Israeli intelligence is relevant to us because they built an intelligence organization from the ground up. And when you look at their society prior to 1948, you see that they had been practicing intelligence gathering long before there was a state of Israel. Now, does anyone think that there's anything we could learn from studying an example like that? Does anyone think that our condition couldn't benefit from organizing our own intelligence gathering? Studying what Israel did has value, if for no other reason than to help us stay in the mindset of making intelligence a priority and being serious about it. Because while we're on the subject of Israeli intelligence, the Israelis certainly make it a point to observe us. That's why I told you about that Al Jazeera documentary, The Lobby USA. In one episode, you recall, they showed a hidden camera video of the Israeli government holding a private convention here in the United States. One of the people in attendance at this secret meeting was Judith Varnai Shorer. She's a former Israeli consul general who was operating out of Atlanta. She was one of the main people saying that the biggest problem that they had was young black people in the United States. But don't worry, they've got some black leaders on the payroll.
Another workshop was addressed by Israeli diplomats from consulates in the US. Israel's diplomats may be trying to challenge the apartheid label by canvassing support amongst African Americans.
The major problem of Israel is with the young generation of the black community. Black Lives Matter starts there. I had last week a dinner, sit-down dinner at my house with 40 people, which are considered the leadership of the black community, and it's very important people. They can be part of our doing an activity.
This was an Israeli government official who was saying this. Not some low-level operative or some rogue member of their diplomatic corps. This was a senior member of their administrative government who was saying this on American soil. Their biggest problem wasn't Hamas or Hezbollah or the Palestinian Authority or Syria or even Iran. She said that Israel's biggest problem was young black people in the United States. So you say that we shouldn't be devoting any time or attention to learning about how Israeli intelligence works? Do you think the KGB didn't spend any time asking how American intelligence came to be formed, came to be shaped, and how it came to be organized? Meanwhile, the Israeli government is conducting private meetings in the U.S. And what are the Israelis talking about? They're talking about black people in the United States. Your enemy believes in observing you closely, learning whatever he can and trying to use it. Too many of us make excuses to not learn about our enemies at all. As Sun Tzu said, to know yourself but to not know your enemy means you will lose at least 50% of the time. Problem is, the people who make excuses for not learning about their enemy usually are too lazy to learn about themselves either. And Sun Tzu had an explanation of that too. He said people who refuse to learn about their enemy or even themselves will be endangered in every single battle. Now, if black people want to start winning again, we better start learning to watch people again. Mr. Harvey, aka Your World, was in the military, and one of the things that he likes to say in almost every video is that the most powerful thing you can do is observe and listen. And he's right. When people say intelligence operations, there's a reason that the word intelligence comes before operations, be it in the CIA, the Mossad, MI6, or whomever. They spend most of their time gathering information, and only about 10 to 15% of their time running operations. They watch, they observe, then they strike. Like those young people in Minneapolis who took down that white supremacist terrorist cell. When they saw these clowns on 4chan planning their attack, those black kids didn't post messages saying, "We're on to you." They didn't say anything at all. Those black youth remained silent. They observed who it was, what they looked like, got their names, what vehicle they were in, their clothing, their appearance. They monitored their movements. And when the terrorists showed up, they beat the brakes off of them. In the end, the terrorists wound up going to prison, and the police were forced to close one of their outposts. Now, those black youth, they spent hours and hours observing and gathering information on their enemy. And when it came time to carry out the operation to disrupt the terrorists, that took only about a minute. When it comes to intelligence operations, the intelligence comes first because it's the most important part. We need to know what our enemies are doing before they attack us. That's why intelligence gathering matters. Information is always the greatest form of power, but power isn't given, it's taken. Like those young people who busted up that terrorist cell in Minneapolis. The police were the ones who organized and sent those 4chan terrorists to carry out the attack in the first place. You don't ask racist police who are orchestrating terrorist attacks to keep an eye on their own buddies. And you don't wait to see if a racist, corrupt injustice department in D.C. is going to keep tabs on our enemies either. Your safety and security is simply too important to be left up to chance. When it comes to your protection, you take matters into your own hands because that's how power works. That was the lesson of the 2020 uprisings. Intelligence operations are when information meets an organized effort to use it. Information without an active effort to use it makes it nothing more than empty data. Organized effort without information is misguided at best and directionless at worst. I'm not saying that we need to build a central intelligence agency complete with a headquarters building, but what we do have to do is to get used to the idea that we need to build and develop the capability to find out what our enemies are doing. That means we need to be observant of who's operating and where. We have to start using resources to get information and recruiting people from inside our enemies' ranks to inform for us. There's no such thing as a group that refuses to give information to other groups. People will talk. But as I've said before, the best pry bar to open anyone's lips is money. Doesn't mean you gotta break the bank, and it doesn't mean you give money to just anyone. I've told you about RICE. That's the acronym that covers the 4 major motivations people have whenever they turn informant. And that acronym stands for revenge, ideology, cash, and ego. But there are a couple of conditions. Appealing to someone's sense of revenge only works if that person believes you have the power to inflict pain and punishment on the people they're betraying. Black people control no institutions, nor do we have the power to attack someone else's. Appealing to someone's sense of ideology only works if that person looks at you as being some sort of authority on the matter. Nobody of any political, religious, or social background defers to black people when it comes to those arenas. Appealing to someone's avarice with money is something that we can do, but we have to accept the reality and make sure that we have the resources on hand to do it. And as for appealing to ego, that can work for us. If nothing else, black people in general and black men in specific have cultivated the gift of the gab. We're pretty good at reading people, and we know how to talk to folks and set them at ease and get them to trust us. Our problem is that we mostly use our verbal gifts to try to talk some female into bed or try to talk our way out of paying for something. A lot of black people have a silver tongue, but almost none of us use it to promote our power. On a side note, just to be clear, I'm not saying we need to be waving wads of cash at people whenever we need information. In fact, I'm saying the opposite. That's why I mentioned the 4 motivations. Find out what other people's motivations are before you offer them any money. But if the person is appropriately positioned, then be ready to drop some cash if they're worth it. We don't need to be begging any white power brokers to do anything for us. We need to be organizing and making it very clear we're not waiting around to see what the bad guys are going to be doing. We are going to be proactive by getting inside of their camps, undermining their organizations, and finding out what they don't want us to know. Again, you don't need huge numbers of people to do it, and you don't need millions and millions of dollars for it either. But you do got to make sure that you got a critical mass of resources and people who are dedicated to it. The Mossad wasn't started by tons and tons of people. It was started by a dedicated few. And this is not some sort of bourgeois trivial thing that I'm talking about here. When you live in a world that has decided to organize itself around a principle of anti-black racism, you're going to need means to find out what your enemy doesn't want you to know. Look at the recent scandal with the LA City Council's racist Latino members. There was somebody who was in that room who was recording what was going on in there. That's the kind of thing we need to be doing. Because if you'll notice, nobody actually knows who it was who actually did the recording. But we do know what the result of it was. Intelligence gathering matters, because what's true in business is also true in politics and every other arena of life. The best information of all is inside information. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Jerlene Harris, Mark Anderson, DSC Bland, Samara Morris, and Alice Ransom. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.